The Zoran had once been a shining beacon of peace and enlightenment, a species whose tranquil existence had spanned thousands of years. Their homeworld, Vorith, was a lush planet of vast oceans and floating cities, teeming with life and harmony. The Zoran prided themselves on their intellect, having long since abandoned war and violence in favor of advanced technology that could heal the galaxy's wounds. They had developed a kind of symbiosis with their environment, with each new generation focused on nurturing knowledge, philosophy, and compassion. But that era had ended in a flash. It had been only a decade since the falling star, a cataclysmic event that shattered their planet. The skies above Vorith had turned black as a massive asteroid struck the planet's surface, releasing a deadly wave of energy that destabilized their once pristine world. Entire cities had been reduced to rubble in an instant, and the survivors were left with little more than broken ruins and burning skies. But the asteroid had been only part of the catastrophe. The true disaster came after, when a strange radiation from deep space infected their atmosphere, wiping out most of their flora and fauna, leaving them unable to feed themselves or replenish their resources. As their technological advancements were designed for peace, not war, the Zoran found themselves defenseless against the cruelty of the cosmos. Their once great network of allies, from the peaceful Xerothians to the war-hardened Krovans, turned their backs, dismissing the Zoran's request for aid as a sign of weakness. The galaxy had long seen the Zoran as helpless, their pacifist policies painting them as non-threatening. To most species, the Zoran's refusal to ever engage in violence was a liability, a potential spark for exploitation by others who would use them as tools of war. The Zoran's devastation was seen as a cautionary tale. Never trust a species that doesn't defend itself. And so the Zoran were alone. Amidst the ruins of their once proud civilization, a small group of Zoran leaders came together. They called themselves the Elverath, a name meaning those who seek the way. They knew that without allies, their species was doomed. But they also understood that their only hope lay in finding a new refuge, a new home. With nothing left to lose, they devised a daring plan to approach the rising power of humanity, whose federation had recently expanded into nearby star systems, and request asylum. At first, the plan seemed absurd. The humans had only recently become a presence in the galaxy, and their reputation was one of resourcefulness, but not necessarily of mercy. Yet, the Zoran believed that humanity, with its sense of moral justice and boundless curiosity, might offer them a chance at survival. They hoped humanity would see the value of their scientific knowledge and culture, not as a threat, but as a gift. So a fleet of 3 unarmed ships was prepared, each one carrying a handful of Zoran emissaries, each one a representative of the people's final plea for help. As the fleet traversed the void between the dying Zoran homeworld and human space, there was no certainty. Would they be welcomed, or would humanity reject them as the rest of the galaxy had done? The only thing they could do was hope. And so, as the ships slipped into human territory, the Zoran ambassadors stood silently at the observation windows, staring into the unknown, each one silently praying that they weren't too late. For they knew that the fate of their species, and possibly the future of the galaxy itself, rested on what would happen next. When the Zoran ships entered human space, they did so without fanfare. Their fleet, a trio of sleek vessels that shimmered like ethereal specters against the dark expanse of space, arrived quietly, without warning. The ships were technologically advanced, yet unarmed, a stark contrast to the heavily fortified warships that had come to define human exploration in recent years. It was this very unassuming nature that caused many to question the Zoran's true motives. Were they truly a peaceful race, or was there something more to their presence? Within the corridors of the Human Federation Council, the debate over the Zoran's request for refuge raged. The Federation had expanded rapidly in the past few decades, forging alliances with several species, and their influence was beginning to be felt across the galaxy. However, the Council was still young and divided, with many factions struggling to define humanity's place among the stars. Some saw the Zoran as a golden opportunity to strengthen their alliances, hoping that their advanced knowledge could help humanity achieve new technological feats. Others viewed them with distrust, fearful that the Zoran might be hiding something far more dangerous than they let on. After all, the Zoran had been cast out by every other species in the galaxy. What if their peaceful reputation was a facade? Humanity had only recently begun to deal with intergalactic diplomacy, and the thought of accepting refugees from a fallen empire was a difficult pill to swallow. To some, it felt like inviting disaster. An entire species that could drain human resources and introduce unknown risks into a galaxy still recovering from centuries of war. There were voices that argued the Zoran might be a hidden threat, that their pacifist nature could be a clever tactic to disarm and manipulate others. The idea of being so easily manipulated didn't sit well with some council members, particularly the military leaders. The fear of weakness was prevalent. What if the Zoran were using their advanced technology to lull humanity into a false sense of security before betraying them? What if this was some elaborate ruse to gain access to human military infrastructure? These were the thoughts swirling in the minds of those on the council, and they were hesitant to make a decision. Many feared that the Zoran were not helpless, but calculating, perhaps biding their time until they could strike. The stars were vast and dark, and trusting a species so thoroughly abandoned by their own kind seemed dangerous. Yet, in the midst of this rising tension, there were others who saw things differently. Some believed that this was humanity's moment to prove its own moral compass, to demonstrate that their actions would not be governed by fear. The Zoran, after all, had never waged war, and their request for help was born of genuine desperation. In a galaxy so fractured by conflict, the notion of offering sanctuary to those who had nowhere else to turn appealed to those with a vision of peace, not just power. In the end, it was not a single voice, but a quiet consensus that swayed the council. Humanity would offer the Zoran asylum, but it would not be unconditional. A special envoy would be sent to oversee the integration process, ensuring that the Zoran kept their promises and that humanity's security was not compromised. The decision was made. Humanity would take the first step toward building a new kind of galaxy, one where peace was not an illusion, but a real possibility. The Zoran ambassadors were summoned, and when they arrived on Earth's capital world of Varan, they were greeted with a mixture of hope, curiosity, and underlying wariness. The leaders of the Federation stood in a grand hall, and as the Zoran stepped forward, their translucent skin glowing faintly in the dim light, it became clear this was a fragile moment for both species. The fate of the Zoran would soon be decided, but humanity's future, its place in the galaxy, was now intertwined with their own. It was a moment that could either bring peace to a fractured universe or set in motion a conflict none of them could predict. The Zoran delegation, with their tall, graceful forms and skin that shimmered like gossamer in the dim light, moved slowly into the grand chamber where humanity's leaders awaited. The delegates' translucent skin, an unusual shade of pale violet that glowed faintly, was a stark contrast to the bustling, more solid presence of human representatives. Their presence seemed almost otherworldly, the air around them heavy with the weight of unspoken histories. The chamber, designed for the weighty deliberations of interstellar diplomacy, now felt like a stage for something far greater than a simple meeting. Zoran emissary Kalthor, their leader, stepped forward, his body emanating an almost imperceptible hum, the air around him vibrating with energy. He spoke in the soft, melodic tones that define their language, though a human translator was present to ensure clarity. The message he brought was simple, but heavy with emotion. The Zoran were in crisis, their once great civilization broken, their homeworld all but destroyed. They had nowhere else to turn, no place left in the galaxy that would accept them. Kalthor's words were framed in humility and desperation, a direct plea for asylum, not as conquerors or beggars, but as a species in the throes of survival. They were survivors, not by their strength, but by their resilience, and now they sought humanity's help. They promised to share their vast knowledge of peaceful technology and medicine, and to offer their intelligence in exchange for the safety of their people. In the aftermath of their ruin, the Zoran only wanted to rebuild, to live and perhaps, one day, find a way to prevent the same fate from befalling humanity. The human delegation, sitting on the other side of the polished black table, was a mixture of military and diplomatic leaders, scientists, and advisors. While some looked upon the Zoran with empathy, others scrutinized them with suspicion. Counselor Riva, a military strategist with a hard-won reputation, crossed her arms tightly, her expression guarded. She was among the first to speak after Calthor's plea, her voice steady and cutting. "Your species claims to have advanced technology," Riva said, her eyes narrowing. "But you also claim to be helpless, to have been betrayed by the galaxy. Why should we trust you? What's stopping us from accepting you, only to have you use us as pawns? We've seen the galaxy's darker sides. Why are you different?" Calthor's gaze never wavered. His expression, though composed, carried the weight of a species brought to the brink of extinction. "We have nothing left but our will to survive. Our technology was never meant for war, and we have no interest in conquest. We were once the caretakers of a great empire, an empire that betrayed us. We want nothing more than to rebuild in peace, to contribute to the galaxy as allies, not enemies. We seek only refuge, not power." The room fell silent. Calthor's words, though spoken softly, held a quiet intensity that resonated with several members of the human delegation. But there was still doubt. Captain Lena Varin, a young officer with a reputation for sharp intuition, stood and spoke, her voice confident yet filled with concern. "We've all heard the stories," she said. "The Zoran were once caretakers of the Robotics Empire, creators of technologies that were feared by many. How can we be sure that, after all that's happened, you won't one day turn those same weapons against us?" Calthor bowed his head slightly, acknowledging the suspicion. "The Robotics were not what we are now. We were deceived. Our knowledge was corrupted, and it is no longer in our hands. We've learned the consequences of such power. What we offer now is knowledge of healing, of restoration. The war we once fought is over for us. What remains is the chance to rebuild with your help." For a long moment, the room remained in heavy silence, the weight of their words hanging between the two species. As the human delegates exchanged uneasy glances, the Zoran stood patiently, waiting for a response. The final decision was yet to come, but the beginning of a new chapter had been written. Humanity was faced with a choice: reject the Zoran and risk turning their backs on those who had already lost everything, or extend a hand to a species that might hold the key to a peaceful future. Finally, President Elara Tomasi spoke, her voice calm but resolute. "We will offer you refuge, but the terms are clear. You will be monitored, and your technology will be studied. There can be no secrets between us. If you truly wish to rebuild, we must do so together." The Zoran nodded, their expressions softening with a collective sense of relief, though the burden of their survival weighed heavily on them. The first step had been taken, but as the delegates stood, preparing to leave, no one knew that their decision would soon lead them into a galactic conflict unlike anything they could have imagined. The first few months of the Zoran's integration into human space proceeded with a delicate balance. Initially, the two species seemed to be on the cusp of a promising alliance. The Zoran shared their advanced technologies, energy-efficient propulsion systems, new medical advancements, and methods for cleaning and purifying entire ecosystems ravaged by industrialization. Humanity, in turn, offered resources and access to new worlds, hoping that the Zoran could assist in furthering their own technological development and peacekeeping missions. However, just as things seemed to stabilize, a series of inexplicable attacks began to shake the fragile peace. It started with the disappearance of a mining colony on the remote world of Claris IV, located on the outer rim of human space. A mining operation focused on harvesting rare minerals, it was an isolated and defenseless outpost. The entire colony vanished without a trace. No distress signals, no evidence of sabotage, just a cold, empty void where once a bustling settlement had thrived. Then came a more alarming incident. A military vessel, the U.S. Refuge, disappeared during routine patrol in an area that had recently been claimed by the Federation. Its last known coordinates had shown strange energy readings, ones that were not typical of human technology. The crew was well trained, their communications secure. Yet, like the mining colony, no wreckage, no bodies, no clues had surfaced. Human intelligence sources scrambled to identify any patterns, but there were none, except that both incidents occurred in the proximity of Zoran refugee colonies. As the rumors began to circulate among military leaders, a grim conclusion was quickly drawn. The Zoran, who had once promised peace, might not be as innocent as they had appeared. Could they be secretly involved in these disappearances? Were they hiding something, or worse, manipulating the Federation to serve some darker purpose? The Federation Council convened in a series of tense meetings where the Zoran were called into question. Despite their promise of transparency, the Zoran ambassadors had been vague about their past, refusing to provide detailed histories of their former empire or the technologies they had once wielded. There were whispered theories that the Zoran had hidden weapons of mass destruction or dangerous devices that could destabilize entire star systems. Captain Lena Voren, whose initial concern about the Zoran had been dismissed as paranoia, was now one of the loudest voices in the debate. "We've let them in, we've trusted them, but I'm starting to think we're being played. These attacks aren't coincidences," she argued in one emergency session, her voice rising with frustration. "If we don't act now, we might end up paying the price for our naivety." To the human military, the Zoran's peaceful reputation no longer seemed like a reassuring trait. Their apparent unwillingness to share full details of their history and technology, combined with the mysterious incidents surrounding their settlements, raised enough suspicion for some to call for immediate action. Would the Zoran be removed from Federation space, or worse, detained? Could they even be behind a greater conspiracy? But there were those who were unwilling to cast the Zoran aside so quickly. President Elara Tomasi stood firm in her belief that they had not yet seen enough to justify such drastic measures. The galaxy has no shortage of enemies, and if we cannot extend trust when it is needed most, then we are no better than those who turn their backs on us. We cannot afford to act on fear alone. Despite Tomasi's stance, the pressure to act was mounting. Military intelligence teams were dispatched to investigate the regions surrounding Zoran colonies. Meanwhile, the Zoran, for the first time since their arrival, became distant, their once open communication channels closing off. They refused to cooperate fully with human investigations, citing their own internal concerns and an unwillingness to jeopardize their fragile position within human space. This only deepened suspicion. Then, in the dead of night, another catastrophe struck. A human convoy transporting critical supplies to one of the Zoran colonies was ambushed, its cargo stolen, and its escorts decimated. The attackers, wearing advanced military armor unlike anything the Federation had seen, disappeared into the shadows. No Zoran were involved in the assault, but the connection was unmistakable. As more intelligence gathered, it became apparent that whoever was behind the attacks was targeting the very infrastructure that had been established between humanity and the Zoran. This latest blow pushed the Federation to its breaking point. The debate that had once been centered around trust now shifted to survival. Was humanity truly helping the Zoran, or had they unknowingly placed themselves in the middle of a cosmic game of chess? As accusations flew and the investigation deepened, one thing became clear. The Zoran, despite their promises, might not be as helpless as they had once seemed. As the attacks escalated, the Federation grew divided. While military leaders called for swift action, President Elara Tomasi and her allies in the diplomatic circles insisted that any decision made against the Zoran must be based on concrete evidence, not speculation. The situation was growing untenable. If the Zoran were truly behind the incidents, humanity's future would be at risk. But if the Zoran were innocent, an unjust expulsion could provoke a dangerous rift, one that could lead to war. And that was something no one wanted, especially with tensions already brewing on multiple fronts across the galaxy. Captain Lena Varin, however, had never trusted the Zoran from the start. Her instincts, now proven right, had put her on a collision course with those still willing to give the Zoran the benefit of the doubt. With the latest ambush on the supply convoy, she knew that something darker was unfolding, something that was being carefully hidden behind the Zoran's well-crafted facade. Yet, there were no clear answers, only more questions. Lena was determined to uncover the truth. She initiated a covert operation under the guise of a routine patrol mission, sending a small but capable team to infiltrate one of the Zoran colonies located on Tlaris IV, the very same planet where the mining colony had disappeared. The Federation had yet to establish full oversight on the colonies, and this, Lena believed, was her best chance to discover what was truly happening. The mission was dangerous, and the team was instructed to gather intelligence discreetly. But Lena knew that their success hinged on one crucial factor: finding something, anything, that could expose the Zoran's true intentions. Her team had no illusions about the risk they were taking. If they were discovered, they would not only face the wrath of the Zoran, but would also become pariahs within the Federation itself. After weeks of careful surveillance, Lena's team found their opening. A hidden facility deep within the heart of the Zoran colony seemed suspiciously well guarded. It was a place no civilian had access to, and its presence had never been officially acknowledged by the Zoran representatives. The team infiltrated the compound under the cover of darkness, evading the colony's security systems, and gained access to the facility's internal network. What they uncovered was far worse than anything they had imagined. The facility was not a research center, as the Zoran had claimed, but a secret weapons depot. The data logs revealed blueprints for an array of devastating weapons, including advanced energy disruptors capable of disabling entire fleets in seconds. There were references to a vast network of covert operations, where Zoran factions had been using the Federation's resources and trust to covertly rebuild their war machines. It became clear that not all Zoran were committed to peace. A faction within their ranks, operating in the shadows, had been working toward a resurgence of their former empire, one built not on healing, but on subjugation. The realization hit Lena like a cold wave. The Zoran were divided, and this rogue faction had been quietly sabotaging the Federation's efforts from within, using the guise of peaceful refugees to slip under humanity's radar. The disappearances, the attacks, the stolen supplies, it was all part of a larger plan to destabilize the region, with the hope of resurrecting the Zoran's lost power. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she transmitted the data back to the Federation's military command. But she knew it was only a matter of time before the Zoran would realize their compound had been breached. She and her team made a hasty retreat, narrowly escaping the facility before the alarm was raised. As she made her way back to Federation space, her thoughts raced. This was no longer a matter of diplomatic negotiations. It was a matter of survival. The Zoran's true intentions had been exposed, and now humanity had to decide. Would they stand and fight, or would they risk allowing the galaxy to fall into chaos once again? The pieces were falling into place, and it was clear that the future of the Federation, and perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance. The data that Captain Lena Varin transmitted back to Federation Command sent shockwaves through the corridors of power. What had once been a delicate diplomatic matter had now become a full-scale crisis. The Zoran had not just lied to humanity. They had been playing a long game of deception. Beneath the surface of their promises for peace and scientific cooperation, there was a hidden agenda: the restoration of their war-driven empire, one that had been all but destroyed a decade earlier. The Federation's top military and intelligence officers convened in an emergency session, where the evidence was laid bare for all to see: the secret weapons depot, the plans for energy disruptors, the covert operations. The documents were damning, and there could be no denying it. A rogue faction of the Zoran, one that had not accepted the fall of their empire, had infiltrated the refugee colonies and was actively working to destabilize the galaxy once more. This faction was far more dangerous than anyone had initially realized. President Alara Tomasi was shocked, though she struggled to mask it. She had believed in the Zoran, in their desire to rebuild peacefully. Now that faith was shattered. The question she had been trying to answer for months, the rumors of sabotage, the mysterious disappearances, had all been part of the Zoran's plan. How could she have been so blind? Now what? Counselor Riva, who had been a staunch advocate for cautious engagement with the Zoran, asked, her voice tight with frustration. We can't let this slide. The Zoran have been playing us, and now we're all at risk. General Marcus Drell, a seasoned military strategist, leaned forward, his face a grim mask. It's worse than you think. These weapons could threaten every human colony in the region. If they have enough of them, and if they're willing to use them, no one is safe. Tomasi ran a hand through her hair, the weight of the decision before her unbearable. She had to act quickly, but every option felt fraught with danger. Expelling the Zoran from Federation space would risk igniting the Galactic War. Yet, allowing them to remain, to rebuild their empire in secret, could have catastrophic consequences. But there was another factor Tomasi had not considered, one that was just now coming to light. In the aftermath of the sabotage and the discovery of the weapons, more Zoran factions began to show cracks. Some of the ambassadors who had initially advocated for peace began to slip away from their posts, suspiciously absent when questions about the weapons were raised. The fractures within their society, long buried beneath layers of diplomacy and lies, were starting to surface. With the knowledge that the Zoran were deeply divided, Tomasi knew the Federation had one chance to make the right move. She decided to send a special task force to confront the Zoran directly. The mission would be dangerous. There was no telling how deep the rogue faction's influence went, but it was humanity's best hope to stop a resurgence of the Zoran Empire before it could take root. Tomasi chose Captain Varen to lead the operation, knowing her first-hand knowledge of the Zoran and her instincts would be critical. The mission was simple but perilous. Infiltrate the core of Zoran-controlled space, locate the leadership of the rogue faction, and neutralize their ability to wage war. There could be no compromise. If they were to succeed, they had to eliminate the threat before it spread any further. As Lena prepared for the mission, she couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led them to this point. The Zoran had once been a symbol of hope for the galaxy, a species whose peaceful ideals could have changed everything. Now, they were an enemy to be defeated. But Lena knew one thing for certain. The galaxy was no place for weakness. Humanity had survived countless battles, and they would survive this one too. As the task force assembled, and the ships began to take off toward the heart of Zoran space, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was more than just a fight for survival. It was a test, not just of humanity's strength, but of its values. Would they stand firm in the face of betrayal? Or would the galaxy fall prey to the same cycle of power and destruction that had haunted it for millennia? The answer, she knew, lay in the next steps they would take, and those steps would shape the future of the galaxy forever. Captain Lena Varen's heart pounded in her chest as she stared out the viewport of her ship, the Lancer, as it hurtled through the black void toward the heart of Zoran space. Her task force, comprising the Federation's finest soldiers, engineers, and tacticians, was fully prepared, but Lena knew this mission was unlike any she had faced before. This was not just a military operation. It was a chance to sever the Zoran's ability to wage war before their rogue faction could rebuild their empire. And it wasn't just the Zoran at stake anymore. It was the future of humanity itself. The Lancer cut through the void, its sleek hull almost invisible against the vast, starry backdrop. Behind it trailed several smaller ships, stealth vessels designed to stay under the radar of Zoran patrols. Each member of the task force was acutely aware of the gravity of their mission, and each knew that failure wasn't an option. If they were discovered, if even one Zoran warship caught wind of their presence, The consequences would be disastrous. It wasn't just a military operation now. It was an act of war. As they entered Zoran space, Lena briefed her crew one last time. We don't know how deep their influence runs or who's been compromised. Our first priority is the rogue leadership, the ones behind the weapons development. If we can take them out, we'll cripple the faction. But we need to be quick and decisive. No hesitation. We get in, we get out. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Jonas Kale, glanced at her from across the command deck. Captain, I've been running scans. There's something off about this system. The Zoran ships. They've been acting like they're hiding something. A lot of activity in the region, but very little in terms of fleet movements. It's almost like they're waiting for us. Lena nodded, the unease in Jonas's voice not lost on her. Something was wrong, but there was no turning back now. If the Zoran were waiting for them, that only confirmed their worst fears. This was a trap. The rogue faction must have anticipated this move, and they were ready. Within hours, they arrived at the Zoran colony of Claris II, a once thriving world now shrouded in secrecy. According to intelligence reports, it was the epicenter of the rogue faction's activity. The air felt heavy with tension as the Lancer and its fleet entered the atmosphere, descending toward a massive, sprawling complex deep within the planet's core. This was where the weapons were being developed, where the rogue faction's leadership was hiding. But just as they prepared to land, an alarm blared. A Zoran warship, massive, cloaked, and dangerously close. "We've been detected," Jonas shouted, his voice a mix of disbelief and urgency. "They've been watching us the entire time. They're already launching counterattacks." Lena's mind raced. They had only minutes to make their move. Prepare to deploy the ground team. Lieutenant, initiate evasive maneuvers. We can't stay in this orbit for long. As the task force scrambled into position, the Lancer dodged incoming fire from the Zoran ship, its sleek design allowing it to skim past the laser blasts. But the threat wasn't just from above. The Zoran had deployed ground forces, elite soldiers clad in advanced armor and equipped with high-tech weaponry. Their strategy was clear. They would not let the Federation succeed in crippling their operations. The rogue faction was determined to fight to the bitter end. The task force landed on the surface of Claris II, near the heart of the weapons facility. The moment their boots hit the ground, chaos erupted. Zoran soldiers, heavily armed and far more organized than expected, stormed their position, raining fire down on the Federation team. "Move," Lena shouted, drawing her weapon and charging forward. The ground team, trained for moments like this, followed her lead. Their mission had shifted from reconnaissance to all-out combat. They had no choice but to fight their way to the facility's core, to neutralize the rogue faction's leaders, and dismantle their deadly weaponry. The battle was fierce. The Federation's superior tactics clashed against the Zoran's relentless resolve. As the team advanced through the twisting corridors of the facility, Lena's thoughts were consumed with one question. How had the rogue faction managed to organize this level of resistance without the rest of the Zoran knowing? Were the ambassadors lying all along, or had they, too, been manipulated into thinking peace was possible? The deeper they went, the clearer the truth became. The Zoran's promise of peace had always been a facade, a convenient cover for the powerful war faction that had been planning its resurgence from the start. But now, Lena's task force was poised to end it once and for all. The question was, would they be able to neutralize the threat before the rogue faction could call upon reinforcements, or would they fall into a trap from which there was no escape? As the sound of gunfire echoed through the halls, Lena's resolve hardened. There was no turning back now. The walls of the Zoran weapons facility reverberated with the sound of gunfire and explosions as Captain Lena Veron's team fought their way deeper into the heart of enemy territory. Every step forward was met with resistance. Elite Zoran soldiers, relentless and well-trained, were not going to let their secret empire crumble without a fight. But Lena and her task force were prepared. They were humanity's last line of defense against a dangerous, rising threat, and they would not falter. "Clear the corridor," Lena barked as she led the charge, ducking behind cover to avoid another volley of plasma bolts. Her tactical team, composed of Federation's finest soldiers, moved swiftly, taking out Zoran soldiers with surgical precision. The advance was slow but steady. Their objective was clear: breach the central control room, eliminate the rogue faction's leadership, and deactivate the weapons systems before they could be used. As they moved, the facility became more disorienting. Tight hallways, darkened chambers, and a labyrinth of corridors designed to throw off invaders. The Zoran had prepared for this moment. They had expected retaliation, but what they hadn't counted on was the speed and precision of humanity's military forces. The Federation's task force was unlike anything the Zoran had seen before. "We're almost there," Lieutenant Jomiskale called out, his voice strained but resolute. "The central command is just ahead, but there's a large group of soldiers blocking our path." Lena nodded, motioning for the team to stop and regroup. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes now. Time was running out. The longer they took, the more reinforcements the rogue faction could call. But it wasn't just reinforcements they had to worry about. According to the intelligence they had gathered, there was one weapon in the facility that could turn the tide of the entire conflict: a devastating energy disruptor that could cripple entire fleets in seconds. The rogue faction's leaders had been prepared to use it, and they still might. "Jonas, set up a perimeter. We need to breach that command room in 5 minutes," Lena ordered. She looked around at her team, knowing that the next moments would decide everything. They moved again, faster now, silently, as shadows through the compound. As they neared the central control room, the doors suddenly slid open in front of them. A figure appeared in the doorway, a Zoran, tall and menacing, draped in dark ceremonial armor. The rogue leader had arrived. "Captain Varen," the Zoran spoke, his voice calm but filled with an unmistakable edge. "I knew you would come. It was always a matter of time before you realized the truth." Lena raised her weapon without hesitation. "Your empire ends here. Surrender, or we'll take you down." The Zoran leader smiled darkly, unfazed by her threat. "You still don't understand, do you? This war never ended. It merely lay dormant, waiting for the right moment. And now that moment has come." In a flash, the rogue leader gestured, and the doors to the command room opened wide, revealing a dozen armed Zoran soldiers behind him. The final battle had begun. Lena's team wasted no time. A hail of gunfire erupted, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of ionized plasma. The rogue Zoran soldiers returned fire, but they were no match for the Federation's superior tactics. Despite their high-tech armor, the Zoran were overwhelmed by the sheer determination and coordination of the Federation soldiers. "Captain, we've got control of the disruptor," Jonas yelled, his voice triumphant. Lena glanced back, her heart racing. The weapon was offline, deactivated for good. It was over. The rogue faction's plans were thwarted. But even as they secured the room, the Zoran leader's expression remained cold. "You may have stopped us today, Captain Varen, but you cannot destroy what has already been seeded. There will always be those who hunger for power. There will always be those who will rise again." Lena stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "Maybe, but humanity will stand against it, no matter what." The rogue leader's smile faltered, and for a moment, it seemed like he might make one last move. But with the disruptor disabled and the rogue faction's leadership neutralized, there was no longer any hope for the Zoran war faction. They had lost. As the Zoran leader was taken into custody, Lena surveyed the control room one last time. The facility, once a symbol of the Zoran's hidden plans for domination, now lay in ruins. The Federation had won, this battle, at least, but the war was far from over. There would be consequences, both political and military. The Zoran would no longer be trusted, and their peaceful faction would have to prove their worth to humanity once again. But Lena Varen knew one thing for certain. Humanity had proven its strength, its resilience, and its commitment to peace. The galaxy had been spared from the shadow of the Zorans' resurgence, and the Federation had shown that they would not tolerate tyranny, no matter the form it took. The fight for peace wasn't over, but humanity had taken a decisive step toward ensuring it would endure.